Hello everybody! For this video we're going to be continuing looking at openings, and the one we're going to be looking at here is the Queen's Gambit Accepted, which starts out d4, d5, and white here offers a free pawn with c4. Now this is the starting position of the Queen's Gambit, and if black accepts the gambit, as in takes the pawn, we reach the starting position of this opening. And this has fallen out of fashion somewhat over time, but it is still played, even at the highest levels occasionally. You generally though black doesn't accept the pawn, at least right away. But I have certainly played against this, and it can be quite difficult to play as white if you don't know how to handle this position. Generally, black will allow white to recapture, but there are some lines where black attempts to grimly hang on to the pawn. So without further ado, let's have a look at how this opening can proceed. Here, the move which is generally seen to be better is e3, because if you play e4, then white's d4 pawn can become a target later, and this e3 does give white a good solid pawn chain here. So I learnt about this from the Grandmaster Repertoire series of books on the d4 opening, and I've since then played e3 every time I've reached this position. So black has several options. The main line we'll look at later, but to start off with, let's have a look at b5, trying to hold on to the pawn and not allow white to recapture. Now, if white allows black to play a6, c6, bishop b7, let's say, these four pawns on the queen side can really cramp white's pieces and be just a solid pawn's advantage for black. But the move which is very good here is a4, and the black can go seriously wrong here. b4 is a move to be considered, but then white could just take on c4. So if a6 is played, white can take, and black's pawn will be pinned, because if it recaptures, white can take the rook on a8. But what about c6 here? Can anyone see how white regains the pawn in this position? Yeah, just take it. And black cannot recapture, because if he does, or she does, then there's a rather lovely move, queen f3, made possible by the fact that the white pawn is not on e4. And here black cannot defend the rook on a8, so this would be chalked up as a loss for black. So going back, supposing black instead plays bishop a6 or bishop d7, white can again win the pawn back with taking, bishop takes, and now knight a3, attacking both the bishop and the pawn on c4. If black does anything like c6 here, then you could simply take the pawn on c4. And if there's only one move that defends both the bishop and the pawn, which is queen d5, and here we can win the pawn back with quite a nice tactic. Knight takes c4, and again, black kind of has to take it if he wants to prove he's better. If not, then we have a good position as white. So takes, and now there's a double attack here, or a fork, with queen a4 check, winning the piece that we've just sacrificed back. So a disastrous move here would be would be like bishop b5 or queen b5, where white gains quite a strong initiative. So black can play knight d7, and watch out, because if bishop takes c4, queen takes g2 could be very very embarrassing. So queen takes, and black's pawn structure here is not very good, so white would have the best of the opening. A possible line that could result from this position is c6 to defend the queen, knight f3, knight g f6, bishop d2, e6, bishop e2, bishop e7, castles, castles, rook fc1. And here I feel that white has a good position, and after, say, rook fc8, white is the one with the initiative and who has the slight edge here. And what's good to notice is that white is no longer down a pawn. He regained the pawn with that knight takes c4 trick. So black is, I think, worse in this line. So those are the lines where black plays b5 to defend the pawn. Not very good. So instead, there are a couple of other options. There's queen d5, which is almost never seen, but again, I feel I should cover it. Knight c3 is a natural move. Then queen c6. Quite possibly d5 or knight f3 would be good here. Bishop g4. d5 now. And we're just kicking the queen around. I feel that white is clearly better here, but we need to prove it by winning the pawn back at least. So queen c5. Check. Knight d7. You could take immediately, but I think knight e5 is somewhat stronger here. Develop. And now we can take. And here I feel that white is so much better coordinated and has developed more effectively. So after, say, c6, trying to swap off, white could attempt to hurt the black queen, and I think b5 might be the best move here, where it will be even on material, but after a few swaps, I mean, look at this position here. It's black to move, but white could play a3 to blockade the doubled isolated pawns. White clearly has the best pawn structure and is ahead in development. So I don't feel that the queen d5 line would be very useful. And you don't even need to memorize all the moves I've just played. Just the queen's out early, so just keep attacking it. And black's pawn should drop off, generally. So going back, there are a couple of other moves. One is c6 is a move I've seen quite often. Not a bad move at all. Let's take it, take the pawn. b5, bishop b3, stay on the long diagonal. And now, assuming that black wants to try and gain space, other moves might transpose. So let's have a look at a5. I would simply ignore the pawns and play knight f3. a4, bishop c2. So white's bishop isn't bad at all. It's still on a good long diagonal, aiming at the king side, so black might be in trouble if he castles. Perhaps knight d7, castle, knight gf6, e4, and now black needs to develop his other bishop on f8, so perhaps e6 would be played. And here, after knight c3, if black isn't very, very careful, this is actually a game that I played about 2 years ago. Black played bishop e7, and now this is quite a thematic idea in the Queen's Gambit, accepted, and also in some lines in the Catalan, which is a similar opening, white can try pushing on to d5 and opening up the centre when black's king is still in the middle of the board. So takes, 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 takes. And I think if black was sensible, he would just castle. But if he swaps off, the rook needs to move. Now knight g5 to threaten h7 and f7. Takes, takes. Knight f6, trying to swap off, even though queen takes queen, king takes would still be undesirable. Queen c6, bishop d7, and now the black king is going to get slaughtered with rook fe1 check, queen d6 check, rook a d1. So this is the kind of position that can result if black doesn't develop pieces quickly, and especially with an open centre, white's superior development will show. So queen b6 was played and the game ended with queen takes, rook takes, and I was slightly annoyed I didn't see quite a nice move, rook takes bishop, knight takes rook e8 check, and then white can win another way, but I just decided to win a piece. Much simpler. So that could be a possible line, perhaps not all the way up to this point, but that could be possible if c6 was played and if black doesn't develop. So we'll go to the main line. I'm not going to look at bishop e6 here because I don't consider it to be that good a move. You can simply play knight a3, and black is going to have serious trouble holding onto that pawn, as well as bishop e6 doesn't allow the f8 bishop to come out, except to fianchetto. So it restricts black's options, and I don't really like that line for black at all, really. So there's also, what was I going to say? Yes, if bishop e6, knight a3, queen d5, queen a4 would win the pawn back immediately, if nothing else. So the main move, which we'll look at, is knight f6. Bishop takes, and black is going to try and complete development and undermine white's d4 control with the thrust c5 as a pawn break. That's usually the idea. So one line that is very possible is e6, knight f3, bishop e7, castles, castles. So here we've actually reached a position very similar to an opening called the Catalan, which shares almost the same features as the Queen's Gambit accepted, but usually here black has only taken in the last move or so, rather than starting out with d5 takes c4. Other than that, it's pretty much identical. So knight c3, and c5 is usually played around now. If white takes, then I feel that white's lost a lot of his advantage because the pawn structure will be identical, and I don't really think that, as the position is practically symmetrical, I don't really think that white has used the first move advantage to a great deal of purpose here. White hasn't really done a lot with the first move. So queen e2 would be my move. Knight c6, and now rook d1. So developing the rook, again putting it on the same line as the black queen. I know I've said this in other videos, but it is a very good tactical resource. So often black will just play queen c7. Now maybe a3. So the idea is that we could possibly take on c5 and then play b4 with a tempo, and that would allow bishop b2 to be played. And that way, even though the pawn structure would be similar, with all the pawns on the same files, white's pawns are gaining space and his bishop is developed better than the counterpart on c8. So rook d8 would be played, I think. Takes, rook takes, queen takes, bishop takes. b4. Bishop moves back. And now there is the idea of knight takes b4, hitting the bishop on c4 with the queen. So queen e2 could be played. Bishop d7. Bishop b2. Rook c8 with the same idea of knight takes b4, and then the black queen could take the bishop, winning a pawn. So perhaps knight b5, queen b8, rook d1, and black might have to settle for rook d8 challenging white. And here I feel that white's space advantage is going to give him or her a small advantage, as well as black's queen being a little bit more passive than white's, and also white's bishops being more active than black's bishops. So these lines that I have shown you are just one or two more moves. Knight b d2, d4, takes, bishop takes. Yeah, so this is the end of the sample line that I've supplied you with here. And I think that this is still very good for white. Anyway, these are the lines that you are probably going to encounter if your opponent takes early on c4. So I think the overarching theme of the Queen's Gambit accepted for white is to quickly develop your pieces, castle on the king side early to avoid any embarrassing tactics, and be very aware of black's pieces and pawn structure, because often if it looks like they're able to defend c4, there's often something that they might have overlooked. So perhaps you could damage their pawn structure, or use the badly coordinated black pieces to your advantage, or use a cute little tactics like the knight takes c4 line. Anyway, I hope you got something from this video. Comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.